Hello there, this is Robert Thibodeau, MayflowerBookshop.com. And today I'd like to share with you the hermetic wisdom of the Divine Pymander. Divine Pymander being a pre-Christian book, hard to date, whether it's 300 or 400 BC or 3000 BC or 1000 BC. The Divine Pymander is a hermetic work. Divine Pymander meaning the Good Shepherd, the Divine Pymander of Hermes Trismegistus, thrice born Hermes. And this corresponds with this idea of being born three times, almost implies dying three times. The physical, etheric, and astral body, or the thinking, the physical, emotional, mental, mineral, plant, and animal, is the wisdom or the leftovers from the last three Earth evolutions, of which, according to Theosophy and esoteric science, Rudolf Steiner's Anthroposophy, and many Eastern schools, that we're on the fourth Earth. And again, this is Robert Thibodeau trying to share with you as fellow students of Hermetics and Anthroposophy and Theosophy and the ancient wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism, you know, and even ancient India, Persia, Egypt, the Grail, all the spiritual. I mean, the idea is that these talks are trying to share spiritual wisdom and research that would help you in your research. And everything I say is kind of my opinion or my sharing with you pieces of books and wisdom from spiritual teachers that I've met to help you in your studies. And primarily, not only to help you in your studies, but to help you to raise your own consciousness and be free and happy, or co-creative or co-creative with the whole of your life and the future destiny of the planet. As we can see, the planet seems to be in a little bit of trouble. People, in spite of their best intentions, seem to be causing a lot of trouble, unnecessary trouble that doesn't always bring wisdom and insight. And the newspapers are full of scary things. And so what I've been doing is trying to study all the ancient religions and present new ones, philosophies and culture and art and religion and science, especially spiritual science, in hopes that we can gain some kind of knowledge that would be compatible with our hearts, so that our heart and our thinking, our heart and our heads can create two wings that can allow our soul greater freedom and greater sense of capacity to reach our ideals and manifest our destiny, manifest our dreams. So when we look at the Divine Pymander of Hermes Trismegistus, one of the things that really stands out is that, like Rudolf Steiner's foundation stone meditation, the Divine Pymander, they talk about the three heads: the theological, God is unmanifest, God is the most manifest, God is the unmanifest and the most manifest, and the hymns to the All-Father. Now, in the Trinity of Father, Son, Holy Ghost, or what I refer to in my book, Astrological Aspects, the Art, the father principle of Neoplatonism is universal oneness and wholeness. The Son, the only begotten Son, S-U-N, or S-O-N, or daughter of this oneness, is the light of the Son, the Christos, the thinking in all things, the universal mind. It's the second head in the Divine Pymander. And Neoplatonism, pre-Christian all the way to 400, 500 AD, Neoplatonism of which Blavatsky, H.P. Blavatsky claims was the foundation stone for her Isis Unveiled, which Rudolf Steiner claims is a book that was written by Christian Rosenkreutz of the Rosy Cross Rosicrucians through the hand, or perhaps the mind-soul, of H.P. Blavatsky. So if you're a student, I'm kind of addressing myself mostly to Theosophists, Tibetan Buddhists, Manly Haw students, Anthroposophy, Blavatsky, Steiner, mostly. And this wonderful Theosophy, which is the wisdom of deity or God, and Anthroposophy is the wisdom, Sophia, of man or manas thinking. So in Divine Pymander Hermetic book, Divine Pymander, Good Shepard, who writes a version of the Sermon on the Mount, pre-Christian, where virtue overcomes non-virtue. The big teaching is that there's three heads: the theological, which I just mentioned, and the second head is the cosmos, the body of the universe, the eternity, the cosmos, time, and generation. And the third head is anthropos, or anthropological, the archetypal man, the septenary individual, the sevenfold individual human being, the immortal principles, the soul and the dianoetic mind or intelligence, and the soul and the sensible. So there's these three heads of basically deity, cosmos, anthropos or man, and the fourth is the regeneration, the ascent or resurrection, ascent, arising, ascension, the regeneration and ascent of Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes being equatable to the only begotten Son, the universal mind or the Christos or the Buddha nature mind, the Mithras, the Osiris, the Ahura Mazda of the Persians, perhaps even the Zarathustra, the seven holy rishis of ancient India. So you have this idea of God, cosmos, the human being, and this ascent, getting the Trinity to enter into this situation so that there's an ascent of Hermes Trismegistus by virtue overcoming non-virtue. And interestingly enough, I will talk about a little bit of that in my tarot book, because the major 22 arcana are consisting of these 12 tortures or non-virtues that keep overcoming us in the Mithraic mysteries. Also the 12 zodiacal signs of the trials and tribulations and tests of Ulysses, or other Odyssey, the Odysseus, Hercules. This is an ancient idea that the human being descends through the 12 signs of the zodiac and suffers non-virtuous activity until they awaken the virtues. And strangely enough, the Divine Pymander has 10 virtues that overcome the 12, which nobody can explain. Some people try to explain it that two of the virtues are coupled with, or two of the non-virtues are coupled with together, so that there's only really 10 non-virtues. But I really think it's supposed to be telling us something about this descent and the reascent through the 10. And perhaps it has a secret of between 10 and 12 is a secret of 11. But this is a numbers game and reflection and mirror that I don't want to get lost in right now. So basically we're saying that the cross, or the four directions, or the four noble truths, or the four Vedas, that four comes up a lot. And that four is the physical, emotional, mental, with an ego that is caught up with the physical, emotional, mental. And again, I'm trying to share things that hopefully each of us can have our own self-evident fact or truth that we can make our own to help ourselves wherever we are and the people around us. So we're talking about how the Divine Pymander is divided into this deity or God, and then the cosmos, the mind of the cosmos, and then the spirit of man, and then this resurrection and turnaround, ascension, and resurrection. And mind you, Rudolf Steiner's foundation stone meditation, we're coming up to, this is 2021, and at the end of 2022, going into 2023, we're at the 100-year mark of when the Goetheanum was burnt down. And this was a very crushing blow to Anthroposophy. It seriously awakened Rudolf Steiner to give some of his greatest sharings and talks afterwards. He stopped trying to have cosmological, this is just my opinion, they tried to stop this downpouring of higher teachings into our everyday life, and he switched gears to try bottoms up, where he tried, the Rudolf Steiner helped create, he did create actually, with the help of spiritual guidance, he co-created Waldorf schools that keep children in artistic mode until they get older, and biodynamic gardening, one of the greatest achievements of organic gardening, invented composting and companion planting, and it's worthy to read about it and practice biodynamic gardening. And he invented new forms of architecture and art and Goethe's color. He applied Goethe's theories and took it further. Rudolf Steiner was a leading theosophist, the head of the esoteric school of theosophy. And he really was an adept or an initiate of some sort that carried on all the ancient spiritual teachings and put them into a Christology. In his philosophy of freedom, he said that it didn't matter whether Jesus was really here or not, but that something happened where we all got the Christ within us, or the I am, or the Spirit of the Son, heart and intelligence within us. And some great thing happened where humanity as a whole and individually could begin to stop descending further into ignorance and delusion and materialism, and to reascend in higher consciousness to redeem not only our own mistaken souls in ignorance and delusion, but also to redeem the earth and help each other. And so there's a relationship between Rudolf Steiner's foundation stone meditation, which begins by God the Father, and again in Neoplatonism, God the Father is the oneness, and if we're all one, we can't see a difference. And so in that most spiritual place of the Father, so-called, it's not a guy, it's like this oneness and primordial darkness. It's the divine darkness of oneness that goes into the light of the sun, seeing the thinking in all things, in the Christ, or the Spirit of the Son, highest angelic mind, in a way, the heart of the solar system, cosmos. And then comes the Holy Spirit. Steiner, in the Foundation Stone Meditation, almost makes like it's a descent onto the human being, which is the fourth way. The human being is warmed with the light and warmth of the Christos Sun, and that heart rises to the head as an ascension that with single purpose, we as collective direct ourselves toward spiritually blessing the world. It's an amazing thing, and I think that this, you have to wonder if he had to have read the Divine Pymander of Hermes Trismegistus because of the three heads and then the regeneration. It's very much like Rudolf Steiner's foundation stone. You have in the Divine Pymander, when you get the anthropomorphic man, anthropos or man, anthropology part of it, the Divine Pymander, the guardian or gardener, the Good Shepherd, they talk about silence and stillness, which I think approaches the way that Steiner would talk about consciousness soul. That silence and stillness, in the silence and stillness, one shuts off the world and awakens to the seed of the will of God within us. You think of thy will, not mine, in the Our Father, and this energetic that transforms the lower mind into this relationship to stillness and the creator will that resides in the human being, the seed of the will of God or deity. And I wonder if the word God wasn't created by the Roman imperialistic church that kind of ran the world for 1,000 or more years, because and that it was originally deity, because the second person of the Trinity, what we think is God, is really the Christos or the Krishna or the Hermes or the Christ. It's the spirit of the Son that's a spark in our heart that knows the thinking of all things. And so in the Divine Pymander, the stillness gets together with this divine will, this will for virtue and for the good that lies within each human being until it's awakened. And and you wonder if this silence isn't part of the silence isn't part of the philosopher's stone of the Saturn evolution, the first round of the earth, and that the will of God for the good that resides in human is the sun evolution, the second round in theosophy. And then in anthroposophy, the moon evolution heading for the earth we're in now, the fourth earth, with 3 to go. Again, I'm talking to anthroposophists and theosophists and esoteric Buddhists maybe, and Rosicrucians and others, the freshmen. So that we come to the silence and the seed of the will of deity, then we come to uniting of the working. This is in the Divine Pymander. A uniting and working with life and light. And this is part and parcel of Rudolf Steiner's Foundation Stone meditation, the very fourth part, where Steiner has his own way of speaking of this. At the turning point of time, this is the fourth part of Rudolf Steiner's Foundation Stone meditation, after the Father in the limbs goes to the Son, heart, thinking, feeling, and then into the willing of the Spirit, the willing of thinking. That the very willing enters thinking, and that thinking enters into the actions. And at the fourth part, after the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, you might say, at the turning point of time, cosmic spirit light descended into the earthly stream of being. Darkness of night had run its course. The light of day shone forth in human souls. Here's a shining light that gives warmth to poor shepherds' hearts. Light that enlightens the wise heads of kings. God-given light, Christ's Son, give warmth to our hearts. Give light to our heads, that what we found from our hearts, what we guide from our heads, will be good. The Sergio Prokofiev, great anthroposophist, who I got to share a number of times ideas. This will to be good, Steiner's fourth part, Foundation Stone. O light divine, O Son of Christ, warm thou our hearts, enlighten thou our heads, that good may become, this is the will, that good may become, then the heart, from what our hearts we would found. This is an ascension, and this is the thinking. And from our hearts direct, with our heads direct, with single purpose. And from our heads direct, with single purpose. So the will, heart, and the thinking, this goes right with the Divine Pymander. In the stillness, the will to the good that's within human beings, uniting and working with life and light, the Manas spirit self transforms the astral into this love, this life and light, which is like the turning point of the earth. the Buddha Atma, the spirit soul, the soul and spirit. Life and light unite, birthing, creating spirit. The Jupiter evolution of Earth, or the fifth epoch or fifth round, depending on what level you want to approach it. So in the Divine Pymander, the soul descends through the zodiac, acquiring the 12 torments, very similar to Mithric initiation. With the aid of the 10 powers and virtues, is able to shed again in course of its renaissance. That's Renacence, Renaissance, very reminiscent of the Renaissance, which was triggered by Plato's thinking. And this reascent, the Renaissance, almost like the reascent, the reascent, with these 12 non-virtues or tortures or sufferings, with the 10 virtues that transform them. And I think that this has to do with the descent and ascent of the soul through the Kabbalistic 10 or 11 Sephiroth counting Dath, the descent and reascent being the 22 Tarot, which I go in my book. So this great ascent or resurrection, God and man or God-man direct. And the Pymander says at this point of this regeneration, rejuvenation and ascent, in this renaissance and renaissance, there's no daemon. The daemon was like the angel. You no longer need a guardian angel. Like Rudolf Steiner points out that the guardian angel is only here till we get enlightenment, and then we free our angel. By working with the earth in proper gardening, we free the elementals of the garden to do higher work. God and man direct this life and light. The Divine Pymander at first starts with Thoth Trismegistus talking to Hermes, but later, in this part we're on now, is Hermes talking to Tot. It's like the spiritual enlightened being who has come from the unknown darkness of the Ein Sof, the divine darkness of the oneness or God, teaches the human Tot, like Hermes is our higher self or our Christ self, that teaches our thinking, our Tot, T-A-T, our little Tot or little kid, to grow up. And until we're totally enlightened and there's no fallback, there's only learning. There's no shame or blame, there's only learning if we can do it. So the Divine Pymander is this great book, and I want to read from part of it from page 64. We sell the Divine Pymander, of course, at Mayflower. The Secret Sermon on the Mount, where Tot says, I do not know, Trismegistus, from what womb man has come into being, and from what seed. And Hermes talks to Tot, that's us, it's like Krishna to Arjuna or Christ to the apostles. Hermes says, the womb is wisdom, my child. We're all child of the Buddha or child of God or child of Christ. The womb is wisdom, my child. I think that wisdom is in the heart too, by the way. The soul, the heart soul. The womb is wisdom, my child, which is understood in silence, and the seed is the true good. Tot, who sows the seed, Father? For I am altogether at a loss. Hermes, the will of God, my son. And whence comes that which is begotten, Father? Tot says, for it has no part in my essence. Hermes says, that which is begotten will be different. A God, the Son of God, the all-in-all, composed of all the powers. This reminds you of Jesus talking about the seed goes in the ground, but when it finally grows, it doesn't look like the seed. I think that our experiences get composted into fertilizer for our future, and that we're not that same person anymore. We constantly are being born again. Today's a good day to die, the Native American Indian says. And St. Paul in the Christian Gospels says you must die daily. But it's part of the goddess mysteries, the triple goddess of spirit, soul, body, of deity, cosmos, and human well, it's not really human, it's manas. And then it becomes the human getting it all, catching the Trinity and having the turning point of time. And all of a sudden, instead of receiving everything and always getting everything, we give of our higher self. It awakens in light and life and love. Tot answers this Hermes saying that everything would be different when it works. And Tot says, you are speaking to me in riddles and not as a father to his child. Hermes says, this kind of thing my child is not taught, but rather when he wills it, when God wills it, or the higher self wills it, it is brought to recollection by God. It is brought to recollection by God. And this is the first part of the four of the foundation stone of Rudolf Steiner, in the sense of recollection and later awareness, and then that third beholding, and then this resurrection mystery or regeneration. So you can see that if you were to study the Divine Pymander, you would start to come to these amazing things yourself, and each one of us has to discover these things for ourselves. But I thought that I could maybe save you a little time and jumpstart you by sharing the foundation stone of Rudolf Steiner and its relationship to Divine Pymander and Hermetic. This, in a sense, would be Hermetic Christianity, or Hermetic alchemy, or Hermetic Anthroposophy, or the theosophy of the Rosicrucian, the Hermetic Rosicrucian. So we see how Hermes tells Tot that the womb of this new birth and resurrection comes from the wisdom. The womb is the wisdom. And the wisdom in Tibetan Buddhism, the right view of emptiness. Emptiness or calm, abiding space equanimity, it's the stillness. And who sows the seed of the good that's in there before we get to the true beautiful? The will of God. It's a riddle. And Hermes says that this isn't taught, but rather, capital He wills it, and it's brought to recollection by deity. The deity within and without. There's a relationship. Hermes says, I went out of myself into an immortal body, born of nous. Nous is this Christ or universal mind or Hermes. It's a very deep idea, this N-O-U-S. And you think of some of the work of the Hermetic astrologer, an old friend of mine, Robert Powell, and you see him talking about cultivating radiance and the body of immortality. And I remember many, many years ago talking to him about Hermetics, and I had been publishing Hermetic books before he quite took that jump. And so we're all kind of working together in different ways. we're working together separately. We're all one, but we're all separate. And we're trying to develop the mind that can connect heaven and earth in a new way. And so we have this idea of God as theosophy, the wisdom of God, cosmos as the manifestation, and then man or manas or human or woman, anthroposophy, that manifests and unmanifests simultaneously, that spirit and matter are working together. Anthroposophy really tries to bring that out. It's their form of non-dualistic workings, where this invisible person, you and me, are trying to figure out this unmanifest and manifest reality. That's the third step of the three earth evolutions that bring us to ourself. And so we can read in Divine Pymander, page 60, about even the Om. That the Om is a trinity that we have to awaken our the God within us by chanting Om. And I talk about Om a lot in other talks. So we have this idea of the three souls, divine, human, and irrational. And from God to cosmos to sevenfold septenary nature of the human being. And in the Divine Pymander, the Good Shepherd of Hermetic wisdom, Hermes Trismegistus, the sevenfold human being is the number one, the archetypal, that there's something good that we can make true and beautiful within. It's like, it's not a mechanical archetype. It's something really divine is within us that we can awaken to be co-creative with our workings in our daily life. And the second is nous, or the higher mind. And the third is the soul immortal. And this is kind of like spirit, soul, body in a way, but it's also, in the way they're putting it, it's archetypal, the nous, higher mind, and the soul immortal. And that's the higher triad. Like it's a triangle. It's the triangle of the all-seeing eye, or the Atma Buddha Manas. We could say that. Or the spirit, human, and life spirit, and spirit self of Rudolf Steiner. But see, in the Divine Pymander, it's really amazing. It has these sevenfold: archetypal, the nous, the higher mind, the soul immortal. And then it has the lower mind, the human lower mind, that needs to be lifted up to nous, or buddhi, Atma Buddha Manas, lifted up to the buddhi, universal compassion. That lower mind is lifted up and spiritualized and illuminated via the soul immortal, but with this higher compassion that we're co-creative, or the consort to the archetypal Atma. The soul becomes in relationship to the Atma. It's like in the tarot cards, the world, divine Sophia meets the fool. They work together in my tarot book. And so then we have the archetypal, the nous, the soul immortal, the lower mind. Then we have thumos in the Divine Pymander, the irrational animal nature. And then we have epithumia, the appetites, the vegetable desires, vegetable nature though. Irrational animal nature is desires, but then there's this vegetable appetites. And then there's the seventh is soma, or the physical body, or sleep. And that's the sensible finite realm. So we have spirit, mind, soul, and body. And this is all presented very much like Rudolf Steiner's, or the Theosophists that have Atma Buddha Manas and the higher and lower mind, and then they have the astro and the prana etheric, and then they have the stula shihira, or the bhuti of the physical, which we're calling soma, of the physical body here. So this is this is not new, this idea of 7 earths and 7 epochs and 7 bodies that are formulated and awakened. Like we're in the middle of the 4th earth, and so we have a physical, emotional, mental, physical, etheric, astral body that now is halfway of discovering the true I am, and the relationship of the divine Father, Son, and Holy Spirit kind of incarnating into the human being, to rise into the future of universal mind, universal love, compassion, and universal truth. And these are the 3 future states of our own higher soul once we have fulfilled what's called the turning point in time by Rudolf Steiner. And you can see this in Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine. The turning point is the descent of the spirit to awaken the soul at the deepest point in matter, and then there's a reascent. And again, this is continued in the Hermetic Tarot book I'm coming out with. So we have this 7-fold or 3-fold, depending on how you look at it. Steiner in Theosophy has the higher 3 and the lower 3, and the mind soul, the human being between there. But he says that soul is 3-fold too. And you can see it as sentient soul, intellectual soul, the intelligence of the world, and the consciousness soul, which is the stillness with the will of God, or the goodness, the virtue. That then you have the higher 3, the middle 3, and the upper 3 seeking enlightenment, and that's the 9 muses, feminine muses of the ancient Greeks, turned into the 9 Dionysian archetypes, angels, archangels, archai, and so on, seraphim, cherubim, thrones. There's 9. And you can read about that in Dionysius Areopagite book. That's a companion to the Divine Pymander. And you can read about another interesting trinity going into the 4 with Plotinus book, Liberation of the Soul. and the path of liberation of the soul. So here we are. Again, we're now talking about the turning point of time from receiving to radiating or shining or giving, sharing, with the idea that Jesus tells the apostles, do you not know ye are gods? Ye are gods in the becoming. And this whole idea of the Neoplatonists is that gods were the virtues. They're not that we're ego tripping. They're in experiment with trying to invoke virtue. The 7 virtues that are talked about very well in The Voice of the Silence, the Heart Sutra, by H.P. Blavatsky, and I talk about that in the Foundation Stone Meditation in another talk. So in the Divine Pymander, we talk about they talk about the secret song of praise and this turning point of time from receiving to sharing, radiating, giving, sharing. And I couple that with ye are gods, or virtues that awaken and transform negativity into positivity, which is a big theme in the Prajna Paramitas of the Tibetan Buddhists and The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky, and in How to Know the Higher Worlds by Rudolf Steiner, in talking about virtues awakening the chakras and protecting them from misfortune. The will to be good, Steiner's 4th part of the Foundation Stone, O light divine, O sun, this shining sun of Christ, warm thou our hearts, enlighten our heads, that good may become, the will, what from our hearts we would found, and from our heads direct with single purpose. And you wonder, I have to wonder with Prokofiev, I have my own wondering, as we enter in to the 100 years since the Foundation Stone meditation, and we talk about Rudolf Steiner's available to public and privately first class material, of which H.P. Blavatsky had the 3 degrees of the esoteric school of theosophy, and Rudolf Steiner was going to have 3 degrees in his secret school, esoteric school. And all ancient traditions, according to Isis Unveiled, were 3 degrees of initiation. And I believe that was the higher trinity transforming the thinking, feeling, and willing, or the physical, emotional, and mental in the human being. And that the soul awakens with its cosmic spiritual responsibility of trying to bridge together our higher self with our everyday self. And unless this happens, I mean, the reason I'm sharing all this and trying so desperately for many years to turn people onto knowledge at the Mayflower and on website and talks I give, and with fellow students who also give talks, is to help the earth come to peace and self-realization. And in Rudolf Steiner's first class, he calls it the Michael school, the Michael. And of course, in my astrology book, I point out that Michael is the same letters as alchemy, except in alchemy spelled with the I at the end, not Y. So Michael is like St. George and the Dragon. Michael is an archangel, and Rudolf Steiner makes a huge thing of this and delineates it and shares knowledge about it like nobody else does. But it is mentioned in the collective writings of H.P. Blavatsky and elsewhere that he's the head archangel of this time spirit. He's a leading time spirit of our times. And Rudolf Steiner dedicates the first class to the Michael spirit. And I wonder if this is part of the wonder of the 5th cultural epoch, that we should wonder if there's a way within and without. And these 3 classes are the transformation of the 3 gunas, the tamas, rajas, and sattva, the idea of the physical, emotional, mental, thinking, feeling, willing, the spirit, soul, body, from being over-crystallized and aromatically materialized. A term arose from ancient Persia as the bad guy of ignorance and darkness, And then the other one is the Luciferic spirits of having too much spirituality and fun and not being practical. And then the third guna of asuras, this is in Rudolf Steiner's terminology. Everybody has their own terminology. In Masonry, there's the three ruffians or goons that try to put down the spiritual ego from learning spiritual truth and rising instead of falling. And so these three classes that were going to be three classes of Rudolf Steiner and Blavatsky and the ancient initiations of pagan rites. Even Masonry were originally 3 degrees, and later people added. You can read about it, Isis Unveiled by Blavatsky. So you wonder if the second class was going to be more concerning CRC in the Rosicrucian mysteries, the chemical wedding, possibly Michael and Sophia, the teachings of compassion, the teachings from the first class of the fifth cultural epoch to the of wrestling with good and evil and the ideas that are in Faust, to the sixth epoch of Parsifal and the Holy Grail and compassion, and here Christ is the higher self, the higher I, that is represented as when we can experience humanity as a whole in their collective wish and ideal and spiritual. This is also the triple goddess, this idea of rising from the hag and the Lilith witch, Ishtar, descent of the goddess, the Mary Magdalene, of the sufferings and struggle and trials of spirit and matter confusing our soul and being like crucified between the two, you might say, or trying to get through the intermittently clapping rocks as the initiation of Jason and the Argonauts trying to get home, or Odysseus trying to get home. This idea of being crucified between the horizontal and the vertical, between spirit and matter, and that the circle and cross of the Templars was the idea of having the fifth, the center of being still point between the circle and cross of spirit and matter, and that one rises in stillness to the goodness that is inherent in us and in the cosmos and the deity. And so we go to second class possibly in the future, and everybody has ideas about this. You can read about a lot of people have good ideas, and I'm just wondering if the second class is Michael, alchemy of divine Sophia and compassion and the Grail mysteries, and that the third class could very well be a more direct seeing and conscience of the Christ, the Michael, Sophia, and Christos working together, and with the coming into this deity relationship of the coming forth by day. The ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead was the coming forth by day originally, where the heart was weighed against a feather when you died. And when you died, if your heart was heavier than a feather, you would go into the underworld. You'd be tossed underneath the Great Pyramid into the four corners of the earth. You return to the earth. You can see in one of my talks the fold-out charts of the triangle and the six-pointed star and the circle and cross. Below that, the triangle, then below that, the six-pointed star with the dot in the center, and then the circle and cross. And you can see this Kabbalistic formula that I delineate in the tarot book coming, Hermetic Tarot. And you can see this idea of the descent and the idea of the reascent. The triple goddess being the Mary Magdalene, or the descent of the goddess Ishtar, where they get the Ishtar, death and rebirth mysteries later. And the idea of the witch or Lilith. Many stories about the descent of the goddess and the reascent into the hero goddesses of Artemis or Athena, or there's so many goddesses that appear. Hecate can be part of that first step, circle and cross, but she also is part of the hero goddess. She's like has partly immortal side, and the six-pointed star are the spiritual beings that are between, like the bodhisattvas and the heroic Buddhas, the Tara. I could go on forever about that. There'd be another talk. And then the divine Sophia, the stillness of God, is the higher triad Sophia. So there's a triple goddess that is associated with spirit, soul, body, and thinking, feeling, willing, that have been unredeemed and redeemed. And this would be a whole nother talk. Old friend of mine who owns Fanny's Press, David Fiedler, published a nice book on the triple goddess, but nobody goes into it like Prokofiev and Rudolf Steiner and some of the feminist intelligences and hearts that are out there writing about it. There's a lot of great books that try to approach the mysteries of Sophia and the inner triple form. Sophia meaning wisdom. So in the Bible, whatever you see wisdom, you see this idea of the goddess. I wanted to introduce that because in the history, the idea of history being his story, it's a lot of work to restructure the language, and it's worthy of trying to get the spiritual teachings that were available to us before, and then we are on our own self we can digest that experience and have our own turning point of time where we radiate out some fresh teaching about gardening and raising kids and cooking macrobiotic or vegetarian or vegan or combination of meat and vegetable, whatever you're eating, that somehow it has cosmic nutrition as well as vitamins, that it doesn't have just dead vitamins that were manufactured in a scientific laboratory, but it has these living etheric formative forces in astrality, etheric astral spiritual forces of the cosmos, and thus deity and the rhythms of Mother Nature that formulate in people who grow things over time. And this relationship of the inner earth and the roots. Like actually the idea of hermetics is half revealed, half concealed. And so you see a tree that reveals itself outwardly, but it has this whole concealed side inside. And human beings have this whole inner life, which is a descent and reascent, you might say, of consciousness. And we have this whole outer life where we ascend physically, but then we descend into our life and our inner and outer world to reascend either at initiation, enlightenment, or death to the spiritual worlds, and to experience the spiritual worlds fully in our highest spiritual self, to then, with new wishes to do better, reincarnate. And you can read about this with Rudolf Steiner in his many books on reincarnation and karma. States After Death by H.P. Blavatsky is a wonderful $3 pamphlet or whatever. Her Key to Theosophy is a wonderful book on the logic and simplicity. Rudolf Steiner, again, was a theosophist, and he certainly read these books. So, along with many other books. I think that Blavatsky and Steiner and Manly Hall, they were not afraid to read everything they could of every spiritual teaching, to put it together for where they were at and where we're at, and what's the next step that would, number one, help ourselves, the Hinayana, Theravedic school of Buddhism. And the second degree in Buddhism is the Mahayana, the greater vehicle of helping others. Once we help ourselves and we get a little bit of enlightenment, we try to help others. And there's no shame or blame, there's only learning, but the learning's tough sometimes. And it's tough for me. And then we go to the Mahayana, trying to help others to help enlightenment for ourselves and others. And then the third, the Vajrayana or Mantrayana, is the higher yoga tantra of trying to have union with virtues and deity and cosmos, and that's what is talked about in all these books. Foundation Stone Meditation for one, and the Divine Pymander for two, and the Neoplatonists, which I think probably formulated all the great teachings since Atlantis and pre-Christian and all the pagan, so-called pagan teachings of pagans like Aristotle and Pythagoras and Plato and Zarathustra and Ahura Mazda, the Persian mystery, all those India, Tibetan mysteries. So the foundation stone, we get to this idea of Michael as cosmic intelligence and CRC as earthly wisdom transformed the experience of Isis as naivety and ignorance and delusion, and putting it as an ideal of the divine feminine that leads us onward, as in Faust. that we're not in our will, our lower third or upper third, that we're somehow have totally identified with the heart, and that the upper and lower worlds of heaven and earth serve the heart as two like altar boys or altar girl. And it serves the high, this rebuilding of the temple. The altar is the heart. The head and the will are the temple, the TEMPO, the rhythms of the feminine, masculine ideal of spiritual and material, higher and lower. There's no really lower. It's like spirit and matter, mother's mater. Meeting in this altar of the heart. It is my opinion that the heart is not a temple, although we could say that. But it's the altar of the heart. When you go to the heart in the right way, you alter your thinking and willing and feeling, and it's transformed into the higher thinking, feeling, and willing. And this relationship of Michael, the cosmic intelligence, with the earthly wisdom that arises with CRC, to birth the Christ with it, not I, but the Christ within me, it says in the New Testament. All spiritual teachings have some wisdom if we can find it, and we're awakening it with our higher love. So that through love, in this third degree, the Christ through love, not I, but the Christ within me, the I am, is the divine Sophia stillness birthing the Christos. And the foundation stone in the voice of the silence for those of goodwill and destiny to help co-create a new virtue, mind, stream continuum, the yoga mind, like in my books, and human spiritual virtue, the human spiritual virtue evolution carried by the Christ will, the truth thinking, feeling, and willing, the Christ warmth, a Christ light and warmth. Meet in the heart of freedom and love in both individual and collective, planetary, family, beloved community, a calling forth of the wisdom of the world word, the Sophia and Christos, the pure fool of the tarot, meeting the world soul, the anima mundi, the divine feminine, for future renewal and present turning point and regeneration against the destructive forces of crass materialism, ignorance, and delusion that we've experienced, especially in the last 100 years or more, in the world wars, the Civil War. So God bless us that we can get this, a higher sense of wisdom and compassion. May it hold all present and all presence into the future, from the unknown darkness to the awe-seeing I am of Atma Buddha Manas, of the good, true, and beautiful. Plato said was the experience of God, by the way. And the etheric joining the astro, the six-pointed star, the interlaced triangle of spirit and matter, and the awakening resurrection of the spirit at the center of the cross, that fifth epoch. We are now going into the age of Aquarius, the sixth epoch, for a balance between spirit and matter, and a co-equality between spirit and matter and male-female. So this foundation stone meditation, this fourfold Father, Son, Christ, Holy Spirit, the limbs, the Father will reflected in the depth, the Son, Christ, breath, heart, east to west, and the Holy Spirit thinking from the depth called to the heights. You have the circle and cross right there. And then the fourth turning point of time, the Christ Spirit light descending into souls lit with the deity, the light and the warmth. Light shining, warmth the pure hearts, light to wise heads, God-given light, Christ's Son, the community that warms our hearts, enlightens our heads, working together in this greater sense of identity of the Aquarian age, so that what we found, the foundation we discover in our hearts together, that we can guide from our heads with a will to the good, a will be good, from our heads direct with single purpose. All humanity with one purpose, peace and love on this planet. May human beings hear it. So, Om Mane Padme Hum, a mantra that Blavatsky shared with the Western world. It's the redemption of the Jehovah, Yohe, Vohe, the idea of the divine deity with the feminine and masculine, uniting in the four chambers of the heart to find that fifth chamber of divine wisdom, love, humility, selfless learning, and to reawaken with God's will our divine warmth and light of heart to enter a new thinking that can redeem ourselves and our friends and our neighborhoods and the world around us. Om Mane Padme Hum. Om, another word for God or deity or the Christos or the Hermes, the Mithras, the light and love and life of the higher triad. Om, then Mane is the mind, Padme is the flowering heart, and Hum is so made manifest and be. And so here at the turning point of time with a new Anthroposophy related to the voice of the silence and the foundation stone meditation and the Divine Pymander and the Four Noble Truths. Om is the Christ within, the hope of glory, the deity, the day within that ignites through compassion. Om. And Mane, the mind, universal mind of our whole self, flowering in our whole heart, Padme, Hum, into the world for the good, true, and beautiful to awaken within us all. Be still and know. This is Robert of MayflowerBookshop.com sharing another teaching on Rudolf Steiner's Foundation Stone Meditation, the Voice of the Silence, and the Divine Pymander, and the Triple Goddess, in this idea of the raising of Lazarus and the raising from the dead thinking, the Dead Sea, to the spiritualization of the promised land of the heart, but to go like a Nirmanakaya back into the world to be of help. So I hope this has helped you, and I hope it sparked your spiritual heart and mind to a new way of acting with ourselves and each other. Bless your heart.